Welcome to the channel. This is the Dirty Diesel Customs YouTube channel, and if you're watching this video, it's because you think you might want a 6-liter Power Stroke. Whether or not that's the intoxicating sound they make, that turbo whistle they make at idle, there's a lot of different reasons you might want a 6-liter. Even if it's just a brand loyalty to Ford, you might want to pick one up. We've seen a lot of them come through the shops, whether it's 6.6 Duramaxes, 6.7 Cummins, or 6-liter Power Strokes. We know a thing or two about these trucks, and we just wanted to give you a useful video for when you look at your truck that you can make your own. You have an idea of what you're looking for. So first things first, you're gonna show up with the truck, you're gonna look at it where the owner lives, you're gonna look at it at the parking lot, you're gonna meet them. There's a couple of things we recommend you bring. First off, if you're gonna own a 6-liter or you're gonna own a Ford of some sort, you're probably gonna wanna tune it because diesel trucks are more fun when they're tuned. So if you have the thought that you're gonna buy one of these, I recommend buying the SCT or the tuner that you're gonna use before you go look at it, because then you can use this to also check the monitor and the gauges and the dials on the truck themselves. I don't find factory dials very precise, I don't find them very reliable. On my personal experience between a GM, a Ford, and a Dodge, all three of them had terrible dials. I always used my scanner to make sure I knew what the engine was doing, what the transmission was doing, what the truck was doing in general. So if you're gonna buy one of these trucks, you may as well get the tuner before you go there, because then at least you have more information about the truck when you're actually looking at it. On top of that, we recommend that you bring a flashlight. You're gonna wanna get underneath the truck. You're gonna wanna see what's happening down there. You're gonna see if it's got a lift kit, if any of the ball joints have play, if any of the steering suspension is bad, which we'll look at when we're on the hoist. We're gonna do it on a hoist because I'm trying to film. If I wouldn't bring the truck to a hoist on my own time if I was just looking at a truck at someone's house. That's just so it's gonna be easier to film, so we're not getting under the truck right now. What we're gonna do is the walk around when you first get there. You're gonna take a look at the body. If you're in Canada, like we are, everything has a rust problem, and the 6-liters just being older means it's had more time to set in. Rust is hard to stop, so you want to make sure if you're trying to look at the truck to be a show truck, if you're trying to show it, or if you're trying to make it nice, the less rust you have to start with, the better. So on these things, I mean, every single vehicle has the same kind of problem area. You're going to want to look into the cab doors. You're going to look at these bottom hinges. You're going to want to look on the bottom of the doors. There's these rubber strips. You just kind of want to get down and low on the truck to see what kind of body you're working with. Back here, notice on the fender wells, those are known for having rust. This one's having it start. They're unprotected inside, so that means the salt can get in there, can stick if it's got a bit of mud. The salt and the mud can stick together, or the slush that you drive through when it's spring, fall, kind of that terrible season here in Canada. Same thing with the front. You're gonna want to check your head in there. Make sure nothing looks bad. I mean, surface rust is surface rust. Almost everything has it. That's kind of not something you're gonna worry about. But cancerous rust, mechanical problems, holes through the frame, those are really quite dangerous. So you do wanna get an idea of what you're looking for. As I said, the common areas on these, rear fender wells, the bottom cab corners, that's just where the rocks kick up from the tires. A couple of areas to look for that you just wanna make sure, if you're okay with the truck being a work truck, a bush truck, a 4x4 rig, then you're not as worried about it. But you wanna get down low on the truck. You wanna really see underside of it. On top of that, you'll see the ground I'm standing on has a bunch of burnout marks. I mean, it's really hard overall to tell how a driver treats the trucks before them. Almost recommend that you actually have them drive the truck the first time around the block for you and then get in it, because you can kind of get a gauge of how they treated it. If they turn it on and then go really hard on the revs when it's cold, you can kind of know that happened all the time. Diesels like to be warm. Yeah, from an exterior standpoint, other than body shape, you're really not that much to look for on these vehicles. They're pretty robust bodies. These were made for years. Ford had basically figured it out when they were putting them together, how to make this body style. So it's really find the configuration you want, find the truck that you want, walk around it, make sure that what you're looking for is the configuration that you want. As I said, just look for the common problem areas. Basically anything low that would get hit by rocks from the tires is where you're gonna wanna spend the most effort. A couple of things, the white trucks have a bad habit of peeling their paint. So look on the roof, look up top. No one ever checks up there. So if you have a side step, there's clear coat peeling up there. If you're worried about the roof, you might not see it when you're first looking at it. You wanna make sure that you go around it. The clear coat on these trucks, even if it wasn't that great from factory or it was pretty good, it's still 15 years old by this point. So now that you've walked around the truck, you've decided it's a good enough body that you're looking for, there's no particular areas on the bottom, you're gonna wanna start it. If they haven't warmed it up, that's always nice. You can see how the truck starts cold. But even if they have, wait as long as you can. Talk to them about the truck for a long period of time. Get it back down as close to the cool temperature it should be as you can, because it's nice to know how the truck's gonna work when it's cold, when it's starting for you on a Monday morning and you've gotta go to work. But you're gonna take your key, and if you can, actually have someone else start it, and look at the exhaust pipe, make sure white smoke doesn't come out. If it puffs quite a bit of white smoke that isn't oily smelling, it's quite likely a bad head gasket. You wanna check how the truck starts, and if it starts smoothly, If when you turn the key, you want the FICM to make a consistent electrical humming noise, if you hear a lot of clicks, that could be bad injectors. We'll go into more detail in the shop. But turn the key, have it start, listen to it idle, walk around the truck, make sure there was no smoke that came out, make sure nothing starts pouring out of it. 6 liters are quite loud, so if you're gonna do any talking in front of a camera, make sure you don't start the truck and you continue doing that. So we're gonna move on the inside, we're gonna go for a quick drive, and then we're gonna show up back at the shop and do a once around underneath it so we can point out what you wanna look at under the truck. The first thing we recommend is if you're going on a test drive, unless you also live within a city block of every place you're ever gonna go, driving the truck around the block once really won't tell you that much about it. You wanna get the thing up to operating temperatures. With my personal experience, I've had an LBZ, a 9612 valve, and I have a 2006 6 liter. And I have learned that in those times, none of the factory dials work reliably enough to really learn about a vehicle. So the first thing I recommend doing is get yourself a tuner of some kind or some sort of OBD2 reader, those little Bluetooth ones you can get for your phone, because this will allow you to plug into the truck and see the actual numbers that the dials are giving you, especially since the Ford dashboard doesn't actually have any numbers surrounding where its dials point. It just kind of has general areas. So I'm sitting here looking and I'm noticing that the coolant temperature and the engine oil temperature are within 8 degrees of each other, which is a decent variation. These trucks have oil cooler problems and radiator clogging problems that are well known. So you want to make sure that your engine oil temperature and your coolant temperature stay within 15 degrees of each other. If there's a greater spread than that, it's quite likely that your oil cooler is plugged or something is up with your vehicle that is going to need repair. So make sure that difference between your engine oil temperature and your coolant temperature stays within or below 15 degrees. This truck is running at 178 degrees coolant temperature and 185 degrees oil temperature. Both of those are within respectable numbers. You want to see between 180 and 200, 200 under harder loads. But if you find yourself in that realm, you're doing quite well. I'm also noticing here that the battery voltage, these trucks have a common problem for bad alternators. The 6G alternator is not the strongest one in the world, but also the wiring that goes to them is common for failing. So if you do find yourself with one of these trucks, look at the alternator and the charging system. Make sure that it starts charging it within 60 seconds of starting the truck. If you turn the key with the glow plugs on, when you start it, sometimes the glow plugs will continue cycling and it won't actually start charging higher voltage until about 60 seconds after it starts. So you do just want to make sure that you give it time. If it is not showing higher voltage once it's running for the first 60 seconds, that might not be a fault. These trucks just do cycle their glow plugs for the first little while. But if you see around 13 plus, you've got a healthy alternator. If your truck's batteries have been heavily discharged, you might see higher, but you don't really want to see lower than that. 12.5 is really what the battery should be at, or about 12.6 is really what the batteries will be at, just a stationary with no external forces. So you really don't want to see that low. It could be an alternator issue that the truck actually sometimes won't showcase. The alternators in these 6 liters have a problem for not actually tripping the battery light. It is something to watch out for with these trucks. Make sure that you can see the proper voltage on the charging system. We're going to go back out for a drive now that you've seen the dials. And one of the reasons we highly recommend taking the truck for a drive is because even if you do spend half an hour of the previous owner's time taking it on the highway, taking it in stop and go traffic, running it through all of its paces, yeah, that's a bit of their time, but they're trying to sell the truck. If it's a good truck and they're representing it correctly, nothing's going to happen on that test drive. And that half hour of their time might save you the next 2, 3, 4 years that you're going to own the truck, knowing that you start out with the best one you can. So you do want to just don't feel as though you're imposing. They're going to take your money, so you should make sure that it's the amount of money you want to spend. So we do recommend just properly driving the truck, and that's what we're about to go do. There's a highway up here. You want to get the truck up to highway speeds. Ford 6 liters and, well, Fords and Dodges have live front axles, which means they're more susceptible to something called death wobble. It's not terribly common, but it is more, it can only happen on a live axle. So you do want to make sure that when you get it on the highway, there's no strange vibrations. If you hit any of those divides between a road and a bridge, if the wheel starts wobbling, it can be dangerous, but it's also going to be expensive. So you do want to make sure that you check the front end for play, which we'll do when we throw the truck in the hoist. You want to make sure that the transmission shifts through all its gears correctly, that there's no stumbling, that there's no odd shift points. You can even watch on your SCT, it'll tell you what gear it's in. And sometimes the scanners, the small Bluetooth ones you can get, will do the same thing. Getting on it a little bit, if these trucks have a problem, sometimes they only showcase when they're under load, so we don't recommend going out and doing burnouts in a truck you're doing a test drive on, of course, but we do recommend putting it through its paces, going on the highway, getting it a little higher in the RPMs, because if it has a problem that it's going to showcase, it might only showcase it under heavy load. So we don't recommend, as I said, mobbing a customer or mobbing someone else's truck. We do just recommend make the truck work a little bit to make sure that it can. Now, realistically, a lot of what we just talked about isn't really specific to the 6-liter. It's more specific to the body style, it's more specific to live axle vehicles, and just generally how you look at a used car. What we are going to talk the most about, which is probably going to be the longest part of the video, is under the hood. The 6-liter. Internet talks about it all the time, and it has this reputation for a reason. There are shortcomings to this engine, but man, they sound so good. So there are things, like I completely understand when people want one of these, and especially if you throw some mods at this thing, you don't really have to worry about the transmission. The 5R110 is a great transmission, and it has a proven track record. Keep on top of the fluids, make sure you keep it maintained, and they are robust. You can get 400 or 500 horsepower reliably out of this transmission and not really have to worry about upgrading it. So it's kind of nice that if you throw some money at the engine, you can enjoy it without having to worry about a transmission, where at other trucks, you throw a bunch of money at the engine, the transmission's gonna go, okay, bye. So it's kind of, there's give and takes for all of these, and if you just happen to be a Ford fan, they sound so good. You might be interested in a 6-liter anyways. When you have the truck up to operating temperatures, you want to check the upper rad hose just by squeezing it. And if it's hard, that possibly means there's a lot of pressure in the cooling system due to a bad head gasket. If it's squishy, if it's a little hard to squeeze, that's fine. But if it is rock hard, that means there's possibly a lot of pressure in the head gasket. Another thing you want to do is the degas bottle up there. After about 20 minutes, to make sure that the truck isn't just hot from being run, you want to twist it off or loosen it to make sure that an excessive amount of pressure doesn't come out. At the same time, look at the bottle. If you can see coolant streaks, if you can see the level is low, if you can see excessive amount of it's that kind of crusty coolant that's come out because it's been leaking or pressurized, the caps can get old, but realistically, if there's a lot of coolant coming out of the degas bottle, which is the upper rad hose, what would be on a gas car, a coolant reservoir bottle or an overflow reservoir bottle, it's up on the top there. If there's a lot of coolant coming out of that, it went down in your test drive because you want to check that before you take it out on the road. If it changed while you were driving it, that could be a possible sign of a head gasket. It's quite likely at this point, if it's a 6-liter that has over 100,000 miles or 100,000 kilometers, it's probably had a head gasket done. So you want to see how it was done, when it was done. Do they have the receipts? Do they have the shop information? Did the heads get machined? If it was done to a stock rebuild, it's not a bad thing, but you do kind of want to have an upgraded head gasket done. If you're in there already, you don't want to be in there again. So if the heads were off, were they machined? It's quite likely that damage happened to the heads while it was off or while the head gasket went. So if they're machined, you have a good chance of it not coming back. You want to make sure that they used high quality head gaskets. You want to make sure they did ARP head studs, but you can't just do head studs. We highly recommend having the heads machined and then do head studs in a gasket instead of just head studs, because if there's a warp, if there's a crack, if there's something wrong with the physical components, you can't really get around that. So we highly recommend looking at the receipt, making sure it was done in a high quality way with heads machined, head gaskets, high quality head gaskets, and ARP head studs. The EGR cooler has a high failure point of leaking coolant into the combustion chamber, and what that can cause is burning white smoke on startup. When they're off, it'll leak into the combustion chamber. You'll start the truck and it'll puff white smoke for a little bit, but then be a small enough leak that it's mostly masked while the truck is running. So we do recommend getting the previous owner or getting whoever owns the truck when you're looking at it to start it cold while you stand by the back, because you'll hear it start, you'll hear it run, and you'll see if anything comes out. If it's a blue smoke or a bluish white smoke, that's probably oil. While not the greatest, quite a few trucks just have a little bit of oil leaks. It's not quite as bad, or a little bit of oil burning problem from seals in the turbo that might need to be rebuilt. Things like that are less worrisome generally, but there's still something to know about. But if it's white smoke, chugs quite a bit on startup, sounds like it's running quite rough, exceptional, or out of the ordinary of a 6-liter, if you've heard a couple of them run, it's quite likely a head gasket issue or an EGR cooler issue leaking into the engine. If it's deleted, problems are basically all gone. So if you do, check to see if when they had the head gasket done, they just deleted the EGR cooler or replaced it with a new one. You can get good aftermarket units. Sinister Diesel carries them. We highly recommend putting a new one or getting rid of it. So they sound really good. If you put an exhaust on them, they whistle, when you put them under load. A 6 liter is a great truck after the problems are solved, and that's what we're trying to point you in the direction here, is to make sure you get the right one. Other things you want to look for, as I said, the power steering pump whine. Listen to it if you get the person to turn the wheel a little bit while you have it on the ground. Just listen for it, because it could be a sign that the pump is on its way out. It might be flushable to continue its lifespan, but it's probably got some issues. Leaks, you want to make sure there's no excessive amount of leaks. And oil, make sure the oil is clean, make sure they have records, or at least they have knowledge about when they do the oil changes. The injection system on this truck is run by high pressure oil. So if the oil is done infrequently, done with cheap quality oil, it's quite damaging or quite bad for the truck if it's done incorrectly. So we recommend just check out the maintenance and make sure when you have your 6 liter, you use high quality oil as well. When you turn the key, you want to hear a constant hum when you turn the key from the FICM. That's under the engine bay, you'll hear it kind of do a consistent hum. If it's doing a lot of clicking, that could be a bad indication that your injectors aren't good. That's something you want to listen for. If you have bad injectors, it can be quite expensive. Every 150 to 200,000 kilometers, they usually go. They're quite a common occurrence. You have to get new ones eventually. So if you do hear a lot of clicking when you first turn the key without turning the engine on, it's something to watch out for. Just listen for it, and you might be able to talk them down a little bit, knowing that the injectors might need to be done. We aren't really saying that's a big concern, because most diesel trucks need injectors at this point if you're shopping for one that's 10 to 15 years old. It's just something to know about. If when you turn the key, you're supposed to hear a constant humming sound. If you hear a lot of clicking, it's those injectors that are not coming in correctly. On the test drive, I talked about the alternators. The alternator has a plug right on the top of the engine here. It's quite common to wear. It's quite common for it to crack, and the entire alternator system to just kind of have cheap wires. It's not necessarily your alternator that is bad. There are quite a few videos that go into depth on how to diagnose the alternator system, but it is something to know about. Check the wiring, double check that the casing is fine, that there's no cracked or exposed wire. Sometimes it can be very obvious, and sometimes it can be a lot more subtle. So we do recommend you just do an inspection of the charging system, because they are somewhat problematic in these vehicles. It's a known issue, but there's lots of remedies on video that can show you how to fix them. You're now joining me under the truck, and I'm gonna have a little more room than you will on the other guy's driveway. But this is where you're gonna do a lot of the inspection for the solid front axle, the steering components, the sway bar links, the bushings, everything underneath the truck. This is where you're gonna see the heart and the guts of the truck. First thing that I can tell with this one, it's got an oil leak. That's quite common. It's a rear main seal leak that's back here. It's between the transmission and the engine. It's very common for these trucks to have an engine leak. It just means you're probably gonna have to check the oil level. It's not necessarily a worry, because that's an expensive leak. It's a $3 seal. If it isn't too bad, most owners will leave it be, but it's something to know about, because if they state it's leak-free, either they don't know it's leaking and they haven't been checking the oil, or they're just kind of trying to hide it, which is unfortunate. So double check on that. As I said, it's quite a common leak, and it is very deep. It's between the engine and the transmission. One of the two of them has to come off, probably the cab. So it is expensive to fix if it's not something you want to get into. It just means you have to watch the oil levels from now on when you own the vehicle. Other things, this is new. This looks to be quite greased and a little bit worn, but it is good to know that they're greasing it. A lot of the front end components of these heavy duty trucks are greasable. So look at the grease nipples, look at the joints themselves. Have them been getting greased? Have this person been taking care of the vehicle? This stabilizer is something that helps you not have death wobble. So it's something to note if it looks like it's in terrible shape, if it's got a bend, if it's covered in grease like this one is. It might be something to replace down the road or look into. The leaf springs, you want to make sure that the U-bolts, they're all in good shape. You want to make sure that the joints that connect them to the axle are in good shape. This truck is a lift kit. As I said, we're going to do a video on how to buy a truck with a lift kit specifically, but you want to make sure that everything was installed correctly. You want to make sure nothing is rubbing, because this isn't how the truck was built. Some components are going to have to be put out of the way. This rad hose is held up with a zip tie, but it means it doesn't hit any of the lift kit. So sometimes it may look like a simple fix and it may look cheap, but if you look at its functionality, sometimes something like that can be simple, just to make sure the rad hose doesn't get worn through. It doesn't get destroyed from driving with a lift kit that made things not sit where they were when it was built. Tires, you want to check that the tires themselves are not worn, cupped. The alignment you can see when you're underneath it. You want to make sure that it's an even wear on the tires. You want to check a couple things. Brake leaks, you want to make sure the U-joints look okay. If you can get the person to turn the wheel back and forth, you can hear clicking on them. You can see the suspension bind up if you get someone to move the wheel while you're in front or underneath it. Of course, not moving. You want to have the truck on, and then you can see if these joints here, all of this suspension and steering components, if any of these joints have an excessive amount of play, you'll see it won't look right. They should move together. You want to make sure those don't have a lot of play in them. Same with the steering components coming down from the cab. if there's joints in there, you wanna make sure all that looks okay. Anything with a boot, if you see that it's been off-road a lot and you see a lot of things, twigs, branches sticking out of places they shouldn't be mindful, because the more things you can find that make it look off, then you'll go driving it. If you drive it after, you'll see what makes it drive like it does. And if it drives kind of like it's been poorly maintained, and then you get in here and it looks like it's been poorly maintained, it might not be the truck for you. It might look good on the body, but if it isn't driving right and it isn't looking like it's been taken care of, you might have to wait to find the right one. The first one you look at isn't always the truck you end up buying. So I've turned the camera around. This is the oil pan of the engine. This is where that rear main seal leak is happening. You can see it on the back of the transmission. That's, as I said, something you want to be on top of. It's something, if it is a concern to you, it is something you could work into the price, because, as I said, it's a very expensive fix. This is the front drive shaft. You want to make sure the U-joints look okay. There's a seal here that goes into the axle. You want to make sure nothing is leaking out of there, as well as the diff cover on the front. You want to make sure nothing is leaking. Sway bar links are something that break quite often. These go from the sway bar that mounts across the front axle up to the frame. They are weak links in most vehicles, so you do want to check those out while you're under here. Brake lines, fuel lines, anything that's of an expensive or make sure your vehicle stops and goes, you want to double check them. So you can run them along from the back gas tank all the way up into the engine. You can see if any of them look out of place. The road, you want to look for corrosion. You want to look for anything on the frame that looks out of place. This frame looks pretty solid. It's kind of brown, it's oxidized from being out in the elements, but there's nothing corrosive, there's nothing eating through it, there's nothing damaging to the frame itself that you'd have to worry about. We've moved back here to the transfer case. The transfer case is something that is very seldomly checked, the fluid in those. So if you see leaks coming from this seal here towards the drive shaft, if you see leaks down in the case that are leaking onto this protective skid plate for it, you want to make sure, if you see leaks, double check the level. It's a fill plug right here. You take that out, stick your finger in there, and if there's fluid right to the top, it's full. But if this isn't filled regularly and you can see that it has a leak, it could have damage done to it from having no fluid. The same thing is for the front drive shaft. There is a seal towards the front output. So you want to make sure both of those look like they're still solid, look like they're still not leaking, because then you make sure that this seldomly checked unit has fluid in it. But it's also a good idea, even if you don't see a leak, to check the levels, because it could be so small or minute that you wouldn't see any evidence of it happening. Down here, there's the middle carrier pinion for the two-piece drive shaft. These can get damaged. They can have this rubber bushing inside here damaged. The U-joints, as I said back here, they can go bad. You want to double check that all of this is in good shape, but this would cause a vibration if it was going. It's just something you want to be mindful of, because it is a failure point in the drive shaft of these trucks. Not commonly, but it is something to look for, because it's a joint. A lot of joints, anything moves regularly. I mean, this rotates with the engine, it rotates with the wheels. It's constantly turning, so if you're going to make sure it's good, do it before it's yours. Down here, I actually hadn't had this truck on the hoist until I was making this video, but you can see here it's got a leak in the rear diff. The diff is another one of those ones that is seldomly checked. So if you are down here and you see that, it's possible that the diff is low on fluid inside, so you want to make sure that you have enough, because damage to the rear diff from not checking it is something that could be very either dangerous if the diff locks when it seizes, or it could also just be damaging to your wallet when you have to replace the diff that you didn't want to budget for in the first place, or that you didn't budget into buying your diesel truck. So you'd rather buy a tuner, but now you're buying a diff because the gears are run out of oil. While you're back here, look at the box side. The underside of the box is where quite a bit of rust can accumulate. Look at the shocks, make sure their bodies look okay, make sure that they have no oil leaking down from them. The mounting points are okay. This one's got a bit of corrosion, but that also is kind of par for the course for a 400,000 kilometer truck in Canada, so it's not, you have to balance it against what it is. But look in here, look at the exhaust setup. As I said, the hangers and the carriers, the U-bolts that hold the rear suspension together. You'll see this holds the leaf spring to the axle. It's something you want to make sure is in good shape, because it holds your truck together. Literally holds your truck to the ground. Same thing back here, the sway bar links, that's here right in front of the rear diff. This is the sway bar. There's bushings here that connect it. You want to make sure those are good. This is an electrical sensor for the rear ABS or traction control, ABS I believe. You want to make sure that these are good, and the sway bar links that hold them to the frame, as I said, those are common weak points on most vehicles. This one as well. Your rear brakes, you want to make sure there's no fluid. You can see brake fluid on the inside of the rim. It's leaking in from the brake caliper or the line. So that's just something to mind for when you're down here. There's just a lot of things you want to double check. These may not be detrimental to how the vehicle is actually going to run for you. They may just be maintenance items you have to do down the road. but you want to know they're there. The more you can know about your 6-liter, whether or not it's the 6-liter itself or if it's just general maintenance you're going to have to do for the truck while it's in your ownership, is something you want to know. This one is a pretty decent example because it doesn't have any signs of a head gasket going. It's been recently done. It was done to factory, but that, as I said, isn't always the end of the world. If you keep the EGTs down, if you put an EGT probe inside your truck, if you find a good 6-liter that has a stock head gasket, put an EGT probe in it. Flush the radiator, do things that are preventative maintenance. If you want to make sure those temperatures stay down, a free-flowing exhaust, a nice tune, clean the radiator, make sure your fan is working well. It's an electric, or it's a clutch-driven fan. You want to reach in there and you want to make sure it has decent resistance. It's not super easy to turn, it's not really floppy, because that means its clutch is gone. So yeah, this truck has a couple of maintenance issues. As I said, the rear main seal leaks. The rear diff, we just learned now, leaks, and it has a couple of components here that look like they have some play in them. The engine itself runs really strong. The coolant is the right color, the oil is the right color, it doesn't smoke on startup, it doesn't make any funny noises when it's running. It's a 6-liter, it kind of sounds cool, it's fun to drive, and it does really well. On top of this video, our boss, Jordan, who runs Dirty Diesel Customs, wrote a nice article on how to buy a 6-liter, and it's on our website, and it covers a bit more of what I've said here in depth. We hope this points you in the right direction if you're looking at a 6-liter truck, that you have an idea of what you're looking for when you're inspecting it, when you're driving it, when you're around it, you have an idea of where to look. All of these things, this truck, I would buy. I'm pretty content with this truck. It's got its issue, but it's for the right price. I would trust it. And because on a stock 6-liter, even if it's got a head gasket rebuilt to factory or it's got an aftermarket head gasket, putting in an EGT probe, putting in an MM3 mount that permanently shows you all of the parameters I was telling you about, it will work better than the stock gauges. So we recommend doing something like that. If you keep the temperatures down, keep a nice tune in them, a 6-liter can be a really great truck. So we hope this helps you in deciding whether the one you're looking at or the one you're going to look at is the right one for you. Thank you very much for watching Dirty Diesel Customs. We will see you in our next video.
Dodge Cummins. Yeah. 07, 5.9.